I'm a PI, and I think I'm chasing a monster. Trigger warning. This deals with human trafficking, and if you don't like trauma, I'd suggest clicking away. Story posted by u/C Feign Nevermore. My name is Rain. I'm a PI. I've been on the trail of something strange. Some of the things I've found are hard to believe. There might just be monsters, other than human beings, out there. That's scary enough, because humans are still the most monstrous of all. It started with a drugged little girl claiming she was rescued by monsters, and it only got weirder from there. I've got several weird stories to share. I'll start with mine, where my whole investigation began. Almost 10 years ago, I was just out of high school. My mom is a music producer, so I got some pretty cool privileges. I was a bit of a punk, still am. I followed a few tours, went to some wild parties, and made some stupid mistakes. Nothing that ruined my life, but you know how we are when we're young. Finally, I decided to go to college for a bit, where I made some friends, Jan and Jose Shelby. They were married with a 2-year-old little girl named Hope at the time. They helped me get myself together and figure myself out, all while they juggled parenthood, marriage, and engineering school. Eventually I dropped out and put the skills I acquired into becoming an investigator. I wasn't making much, but I was happy. I watched the Shelby's little girl grow up and their family thrive. I solved a doozy of a case, and the police actually acknowledged my work in their official statement. Even though I wasn't making a whole lot of money of my own, with my friends living nearby, I was content. And then, 3 years ago, someone snatched Hope from her parents, right from under their noses. It was at a mall. Poor Jose looked away for a moment to help a stranger, and then Hope had vanished. She was only 8. Police and even the FBI kept the search going, but the trail went cold. I stayed with them often. I watched the life leaving their eyes with every passing week. I walked into their kitchen one morning. Jose had a knife. I was angry, scared, and sad all at once. But I held it together and put my hand on his shoulder. Then his wife came in and held him. All of us cried. I made up my mind. I'll find her. I'll do everything I can. I gave up everything. I left my apartment, shut down my business, and for the last 2 years, I gave everything to find a trace of their daughter. It wasn't one single creep that took her. She got nabbed by some kind of network, one that covered their tracks well. Personally, I think they had eyes on the investigation somehow, the way they were able to stay ahead. By mooching off my mom, I was able to cut costs. Meanwhile, if I ever needed advice, my dad offered a unique perspective. He's a former Navy SEAL. He's also a hardcore survivalist who thinks a camping trip is getting airdropped into the wilderness with no supplies, other than a Bowie knife. I have a fear of heights because of him, but I digress. When I took it upon myself to find their daughter, my dad helped me set up a small truck as a mobile home. With what money I had, and generous donations from my mom, I became a mobile investigator, living out of a vehicle in various gyms where I showered. I gathered up all the clues and evidence the cops and the FBI were willing to give me, and I went searching. I took odd jobs along the way, and learned to be a more effective PI. But that was all just to support the hunt for Hope. I can be pretty persuasive. Some assholes might call being a woman an advantage in this business. Even if you can weasel a few answers from some sick fuck with a push-up bra, it's definitely not worth the constant harassment and all the other fun shit that comes with womanhood. I'm also pretty handy with computers. With these skills, I found my way onto the dark web. The shit I saw. But I'm not here to talk about that. Suffice it to say, I spent 2 years searching, building trust, learning the language, crossing the country looking for leads. I also started having nightmares from the shit I found. Not all the info I gathered came from legal sources. I even stooped to seduction and theft at one point. The guy thought I was a prostitute. I played the part. He ended up knocked out and handcuffed to a bed, with his own fuzzy pink cuffs. I made a copy of his phone chip. I didn't even have to take my dress off. I'm not ashamed in the slightest. All that mattered was finding hope, so I wouldn't have to watch my friends fall apart. That guy was in deep. With his contacts, I found some really sick shit. But most importantly, I found an ad. 10 years, Hispanic, trained. There was a picture. I only recognized her beautiful brown eyes. I passed some anonymous tips to the police and hoped they'd arrest that shit stain while I chased my lead. A year later, my search took me to a freaking gated community in the suburbs of Middle America. I'd found an IP address linked to a wealthy doctor named Jared Lesterman. The guy was currently divorced, and he and his lawyer had left his ex-wife with nothing. He was a total scumbag. Coworkers hated him, a few citations for drunk misdemeanors, and 2 accusations of sexual assault. His lawyers helped him avoid all the consequences. Now he was buying people. I couldn't get into the community easily to set up cameras. They had security personnel and everything. I found a hill overlooking the area that gave me a good view of his house. I had my camera with a long-range lens to help me scope things out. On only my second night, well, the situation resolved itself. The good doctor left his house at about 10 and returned at midnight. It was hard to make out from my angle, but there was definitely a young woman with him. She wore a bright red pretty dress, and she was either drunk or drugged, judging by how the doctor basically had to carry her inside. Her drunken manner worried the hell out of me. I was getting ready to call local authorities, but I knew I couldn't yet. For all I knew, this was completely consensual, or at least he could claim it was. I kept watching, wrestling with my thoughts, but then I got distracted. Something was emerging from the little copse of trees behind the neighborhood. I thought it was a dog, or maybe a bear at first. Whatever it was pretty big. "What the fuck?" I muttered to myself. I scrambled to try and photograph the thing, but quick as lightning, it bounded over a fence and into the backyard of the good doctor out of sight. Did I just see that? I wondered. What could I do? I kept watching. After a few minutes, all the power to the doctor's house went out. Maybe 15 minutes after that, a policeman arrived. Who called the cops, I wondered. As I watched, the patrolman seemed to hear something and kick down the door. Soon, he'd call in a brigade of police cars. I watched in bewilderment as 3 little girls and a man were carried out of the house on stretchers. It grew into a full-on investigation with almost a whole department going through the house. I just sat there wondering, what the fuck? I was able to get some public details from the police. Someone called and claimed they'd been kidnapped by Dr. Lesterman and needed immediate assistance. They'd only sent 1 cop to investigate, as it didn't seem credible to them. But he'd found an emaciated young girl crying for help. It turned out she wasn't alone. 2 10-year-old girls were found as well. The oldest was Hope. She was 12. Just like that, the case I spent the last 3 years on, putting myself in all kinds of danger, resolved itself. Jan and Jose's little girl was found. I felt hollow, but overjoyed all at once. The official story is, the doctors kept these girls for over a year after buying them from some dark web contacts. But he'd still go out to hunt for young women at clubs. This time he'd chosen poorly. The girl he brought home injured him, putting him in a coma, then fled, presumably having no idea that he had underage sex slaves chained up in the basement. But with him in a coma, the girls found their way out and managed to call for help, bringing in the cops. So this woman inadvertently brought down a human trafficker. It's just a coincidence that I'd started watching. The story doesn't work though, and I'll explain why. Once all the details were made public, I read through them carefully. First off, the woman in red. I had assumed she was some sort of sting operative, but no police had no clue who she was. Furthermore, there was no sign of her at the house. Nobody has come forward to take credit for the act, even after it was all over the news. Maybe she's into some less savory things and wants to stay away from the authorities. I can understand that. But then there's the witnesses. Witnesses saw Dr. Lesterman leave a club with a woman. I saw them enter his house. I didn't get a super good look at her, but I had the impression of a skinny, young, dark-haired woman. Here's the thing. The police got witness descriptions from 12 different people. Each one seemed to describe a completely different person. A large-breasted blonde in a red dress, flat-chested redhead with full lips in a dark red dress, a skinny, normal-looking woman with dark hair wearing maroon, a heavier, older woman with brown hair in a light red dress. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but you get the idea. Even the color of the dress wasn't agreed on by everyone. So who the hell knows who she is? Next, there's the fact that she incapacitated the doctor. It's not entirely outside of the realm of possibility that she'd fought off her attacker and injured him. If so, it was reasonable she might flee. Here's the thing though. I was watching like a hawk. She never fled. It's true there was a blind spot, but I'm fairly confident if anyone was trying to leave the house, I would have seen them. Considering how drunk she seemed, it seems even more unlikely that she overcame her attacker and fled in the 20 minutes it took the cops to arrive. Next on my list of weirdness is the doctor's condition. Nobody can explain his coma. He did have a small bump on his head, but nobody thinks it would have been enough to cause this. The cops found him in his bedroom, pants around his ankles, supposedly with a look of terror on his face, just lying there, drooling. Basically, his condition doesn't match that of a man who might have gotten whacked on the head by a drunk, skinny woman. There were traces of seminal fluid. Had they been in the middle of it when she snapped out of it? If he was on his back, she had more control. And if that was the case, how would she have hit the back of his head from that angle? There's also the weirdness surrounding the girls in the house to consider. In the house, they found a secret room hidden behind the walls of his basement. The official statement of the police is that one of the girls likely smashed her way out. But I know from speaking to officers that that was impossible, for a few reasons. Firstly, rubble on the ground suggested something dug into the room, not out of it. The guy I talked to said it looked a lot like an animal clawed through it to me. Secondly, the girls were all drugged, chained, and weakened from their condition. The chains were all broken, and it's very unlikely that any of them had the strength to break them or smash through a wall. Furthermore, none of the three claims they ever tried to dig their way out. The girls were also found upstairs on a couch. Even if one of them managed to smash through the wall, none of them were in any condition to carry the others up a flight of steps. These girls were drugged and horribly malnourished. Finally, there's the animal I saw. Even I figured the bear or dog was just a weird coincidence. An animal that I just happened to see wander into the doctor's yard 15 minutes before someone called police. I might not be the only one who saw it, though. When police asked the community security crew if anything had been reported, all they had was a complaint about an oversized dog wandering behind the houses. At that point, I was still fairly sure it was unrelated. As you can see, there's a lot of unknowns here. In the end, someone beat me to Hope's rescue. It doesn't bother me that much in the long run. The idea that I'd wasted my time was frustrating, but I was only in it to find her. I didn't come out of it with nothing. I gathered all the evidence I had compiled legally and turned it in, which helped the police solidify their case. If the doctor ever wakes up, he'll be going to jail for a long time. I got a nice reward for my work, but again, I don't care that much about that. Once Hope was home with her mom and dad, I took a few weeks off. I spent it cruising between national parks. Part of that was coming to terms with all the dark web shit I've seen. I needed to detox. I couldn't get that weirdness out of my head though. What the hell happened in there that broke down a wall, called authorities, left a villain in a coma, made a woman disappear, and then left no fucking traces? I started to accept that maybe it was all the woman in red. Maybe she was just in a shit situation that got even shittier when Dr. Lesterman found her. She'd defend herself and gotten away, and somehow I didn't see her. And then, somehow the wall came apart and the girls broke their chains and got out to call for help. It's weird, but it's not too irrational. Once I accepted that, I traveled back to visit my friends. Hope is on the road to recovery. Her eyes are way too weary for a 12-year-old. She gave me a very tentative hug. You could tell physical contact was almost too much for her. She sat down with me on her own, thanking me for working so hard to bring her home. But then she said, "There's something else I was scared to tell the police, but it was weird." Hope, you don't have to say anything else about what you went through. I have to. This is the last thing I don't understand. I want to tell someone. Hope, you gave up so much to try and find me. You don't owe me anything for that. I know, but listen. The drugs he gave me, they didn't work as well as he thought they did, because I was pretending. If I didn't, he'd just give me more. It wasn't much, but it was something. So many hours trying to think. I was too weak to get up. But then, the wall. I could see in her face that she was barely holding it together. Hope. I wanted to stop her. She soldiered on as tears flowed. It was a dog. A big dog with blue eyes. It got our chains off with his hands, clawed through the wall, carried us upstairs. It was scary, but it was gentle. Dog? Hands? Carried? The dog carried you upstairs in its mouth? I think so? I don't know. She was bawling now. A woman came down the stairs. She was so pretty. First the dog went upstairs and came back. Then the woman. No. First I heard the scream. I wanted so badly to hold Hope tight until all her fear went away. That would only make her panic worse. She sucked in a few breaths while I got her some water. The woman. She was naked. But then she wasn't. She was talking to the dog, but I don't know what she was saying. The dog was standing there. He pointed a finger at us. The woman said, "Don't worry." I didn't say anything. What could I say? I just nodded for her to continue. The dog nodded. Then the woman came to me. I saw her eyes. She smelled nice. She whispered to me, "Your nightmare is over." I remember that. She put a phone in my hand and she kissed my head, and I fell asleep. I think she made me sleep. When I woke up, the police were there. At that point, I hushed her and held her hand until she'd calmed down. I wiped a tear from my own eye. No child deserves this. You're safe now. She leaned on me. Her story was strange, but somehow it fits with what I witnessed. She was both traumatized and partly drugged at the time. That makes what she saw questionable, but what I gleaned was a dog had somehow burrowed into the secret room, broken their chains without hurting the girls, and then carried them upstairs. It also apparently had hands. Then the dog went upstairs. Hope heard Lesterman scream, and the dog came back down with a naked woman that was talking to the dog. And her description, the woman was almost magical. This odd pair presumably called the police and then vanished. There's still so many questions. I told Hope I would see what I could find out. Hope's tale is far-fetched at best, even if it fits. I've been looking into things. Part of me wants to meet these two. That was either a really talented and well-trained dog, or it was actually a person. I wonder why she thought it had to be a dog. Could that be the drugs? Was the person wearing a mask or something? They must have had some sort of tool they used to break through the wall and break the chains. I don't know. And the woman? It had to be the woman in red. What did she do to the doctor? And the big question is, how did these two find their way to a human trafficker? I'll leave it at this for now. I've chased leads on this for a few months. It was a trip to a bar that inspired me to try a different approach, which then led me to my current path. There's plenty of normal explanations for all the weirdness, but the weirder explanations have been quite the interesting rabbit hole. And I think I'm closer to tracking down the woman in red and her magic dog. Thank you. If you guys would like to go ahead and pick up a signed copy of the books, they're all over there on the table. And I thank you guys for letting me come down here and read chapter 1 of my biography. Thank you guys again, and I'll see you over there here shortly.